much in our work. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker, who is Kavi Chintam. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Kavi. She's the campaign manager for Illinois at Vote Solar, which is a national organization which advocates for clean energy in legislative and regulatory arenas at the state level. In this role, Kavi works to advance clean energy legislation and engages in coalitions to promote equitable and just measures. Prior to joining Vote Solar, she received her PhD in chemical engineering from Northwestern University. So we're very lucky to have her as a speaker today. Thank you, Kavi.
Thank you so much, Marty. Thanks for having me here today, y'all. Love Third Act. I love to say that I'm a future third actor, and I definitely feel that way every time I come to one of your events. And thanks, Mike, for really grounding us in this conversation. I think the through line of what we're working on at the state level is that data centers come from rich companies, wealthy people, wealthy corporations, and they have more than enough money and resources to be good neighbors. And if they're going to locate in our state, they should do that in a responsible way. Um, this is a big part of doing that. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about what data centers are, how they relate to what is talking about, artificial intelligence, how they specifically impact our energy, water, and air, and then what, as part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, we are pushing for this spring in the Power Act. Next slide. So what are data centers? You can go to the next one. So a data center is a facility. It houses a bunch of servers, essentially. So if you imagine your laptop or your computer, it's a ton of these. They basically look like big black boxes, and they run really hot. So imagine like your laptop getting hot. They run really hot. They take up a lot of space as well. So it's not just things that exist online. They have to be stored, physically in chips, and have processors and things like that. Um, so data centers store a lot of data, as it sounds, but they also do a lot in terms of generative AI. If you go to the next one. So in a data center specifically, there are several things that are housed. So IT equipment, like I said, servers, infrastructure and utilities to actually run the servers. So, for example, uh, the wires that actually power the servers, connectivity, so Wi-Fi, and then physical security in order to keep these data centers secure because there is a lot of money that goes into them again, and there is a lot of personal and private data that's being stored. So there's a need for security, companies want. Yes, next slide. So I know we hear about it probably too much. I see billboards about it everywhere, and it's in every search engine you use. If you go to the next slide, some of the details about generative AI specifically, it's a newer type of AI that it actually learns on top of what it's doing and then creates new content. So if you've seen some of those really janky pictures online that are AI generated and have like third hands and things, that is generative AI. And it gets better because it keeps getting trained. And it gets trained by using data centers. Data centers, one of the reasons they use so much power is because these AI technologies and these programs need a lot of initial energy to run and become better at predicting and modeling and uh, eventually spitting out content that people ask for through ChatGPT or whatever more complex AI software. Next slide. So this was shown at the beginning, closer in Illinois, but this is just to really see the scope of how many data centers are popping up across the country. We have hundreds in Illinois already, and it is, you know, happening at such a rapid pace that we don't even really have a good track of how many are being built. But this website, it's public, anyone can access it. It's one of the better ones that are tracking how many data centers are coming online, which is helpful to see. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some of the impacts of data centers now. And for energy impacts, this is, how much electricity they use. Um, Next slide. And before I get into the impacts, I want to do like a very brief primer on how Illinois operates in the grand scheme of power in the country. So we are part of two regional transmission organizations or RTOs, PJM and MISO. I live in Chicago, so I'm in PJM territory. They are responsible for balancing energy and supply, for taking on new capacity or supply in varying ways in order to do that balance. Capacity, the very short way of saying it is that it's supply. Um, and different sorts of generation have different capacity factors. So solar and wind, for example, have lower capacity factors because the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing, so they aren't able to operate 100% of the time. When they're paired with storage, though, their capacity factors go up. So it's really important for our RTOs to have enough capacity for when there are what we call peak demand. So really hot summer days when everyone is running their air conditioning units, that is times of peak demand, and that is when we need to make sure that there is enough capacity to meet that peak demand. Next one. So every year, these RTOs hold capacity options in order to secure commitments. And how this is relevant to data centers is as we've seen projected demand from data centers, and we see that through interconnection requests from companies asking to get physically connected to the grid. As that has increased dramatically, that therefore makes the RTOs need to get a hold of even more capacity year after year. And we've seen that really skyrocket in the past year. Um, and so that's just become increasingly challenging. And you can see on the graphs here, the one on the bottom left is showing different growth scenarios. And you can see compared to the last 20 years how this is unprecedented, which is a word that is thrown around a lot, but it really is appropriate here. Next slide. So, concerns that we have with this unprecedented demand is that it is just going to add and, frankly, be the main catalyst of the energy affordability crisis. Um, Cost increases, we've already seen that happen over the summer last year. Grid infrastructure costs is another thing that comes about with data centers because they require, new substations to be built, new transmission lines to be built, other infrastructure in order to serve them at a faster rate than what we are used to. And the Union of Concerned Scientists came out with a really great report called Data Center Power Play. I highly recommend folks to read it. It's exciting. It's, maybe boring to read for some, but I found it really fun to read. But they found that ComEd customers in 2024, which was 2 years ago at this point, paid over $200 million for transmission costs. That is like on the charge on our utility bills. And that is only going to get even more with time as these data centers continue to come to the state. Next slide. And you can go to the next one too. So, water usage is another part of this. As I explained, data centers use servers, they house a bunch of servers. And like I said, your laptop is one example. So, it might get hot when you're using it, and then stop using it for a minute and it cools down. Data centers are using servers that are huge and they get very, very hot and also are usually running for 24 hours a day. that means that they need to be cooled regularly. So there are these really interesting cooling systems that happen. The similar thing you might think of in like a nuclear reactor where there's like coolant around a really hot nuclear reactor because it gets hot when reactions are happening. Similarly, there's cooling water that goes through a data center and cools the servers. Um, and you might think like, okay, can it get reused? Yes, but there's also issues because cooling, water evaporates. So there is a rate of evaporation happening at the same time. With energy demand and workloads as we train more and more AI, water use also rises. And also, you can think of the water usage that comes indirectly from like power plants as well. This was kind of gut-wrenching statistic that I saw in a report, which is each 100-word AI prompt is estimated to use roughly one bottle of water. So you can just, multiply that times how much ever and think about just the volume of water that happens when these data centers are used. Okay, next slide. Some additional concerns around data centers. So we in Illinois in 2021 passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which had really great goals for shutting down fossil plants and also goals for decarbonization and clean energy, implementing clean energy. The load growth presented by data centers means that Illinois could miss those goals because if fossil plants are forced to stay open for longer to make sure that people have power, then we aren't decarbonizing. There's also a lot of local impacts. So local air pollution. Most data centers use backup diesel generators in order to work in case of emergencies, which can, diesel generators cause air pollution, and they're also very loud. There's a story in Aurora last November where there's a data center there, and uh, because we don't have the Power Act in law yet. Data centers were running their diesel generator for 3 days, and folks that live nearby were saying that it sounded like jet engines for 3 days straight, which is crazy. Next slide. So, data center policies. I think next slide. Okay, so specifically in Illinois, and I forgot to update these numbers for the Power Act. I can share them though. Oh, maybe I have them on my screen actually. So the Power Act was filed last week. It's House Bill 5513 and Senate Bill 4016. This is brought to you by the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And we basically have three buckets of policies that we've created centered around energy, community, and water. And I'll go through these briefly. Next slide. So our energy provisions in this bill have basically three separate things. So the first one is that data centers have to, like I mentioned, there might be new substations, new transmission lines, just new infrastructure that has to be built to serve these. They are required to pay 100% of those costs. Right now, how our system works is that those costs are spread across all electricity consumers, and we want data centers to pay them. Like I said, they're rich. They have the money to do that. So we want to make sure the costs stay with them. The other part of this is that um, data centers will have to bring their own new clean capacity in order to receive service that is non-interruptible, which means that service can't be cut. Um, for example, if you have a 100 megawatt data center and they bring 60 megawatts of clean capacity, then they will receive firm service up to 60 watts. And then the other 40 megawatts will have to be curtailable. So if there are price spikes or brownouts or something or risks of those, then those 40 megawatts are curtailable. Flexibility is something we really want to promote here. It means that data centers are operating responsibly. So that's that part of the plan. And then the last part is that we have what we call a carrot, so fast load interconnection. So if they meet specific thresholds for energy capacity and backup generation, so like battery storage instead of diesel generators, then they are able to jump the queue ahead of other data centers that are less responsible and connect to the grid faster. Because they aren't straining the grid, they're helping strengthen it ultimately. And then we also have specific provisions in the Power Act for municipal utilities and electric cooperatives. Okay, next slide. For community impacts, we have several provisions that are really first in the country. Really, all of our policies are first in the country, which is very exciting. But one, I mentioned backup generators that are diesel and can run for 24 hours. That is what we passed. They snuck that in at the end of the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. We want to close that loophole and only allow them to run in emergency circumstances up to 4 hours. Emergency circumstances would mean like if the grid goes down, they're only allowed to run for 4 extra hours. We also are requiring cumulative impacts assessments, which will include like certain pollutants, other things that could negatively impact environmental justice communities. And if they are shown to be too burdensome, the Illinois IPA can rule that a data center can't locate within 3 miles of a EJ community or an equity eligible income community. Transparency is also a big thing with data centers. They don't have it right now and aren't required to have it. So this will require data centers, they won't be allowed to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and will also have requirements to sign and engage in communities with community benefits agreements. So that communities will have these kind of baseline protections and then can negotiate their own protections that a specific community might need. And then lastly, in putting their money where their mouth is, data centers have to pay into a public benefits and affordability fund. This will support low income bill assistance, full home retrofits, and also pay into environmental justice grants. So that will be in proportion to how big a data center's load is. Okay, next slide. And then the last part is water. So, like I said, transparency is a big issue with data centers. We simply don't even know how much they use. We just know that it's millions of gallons a day. So, this bill would require data centers to transparently report their expected and actual water uses, including where they're getting their water, which is very important. Excuse me. And then also do an assessment as to alternate ways of cooling. So, like I said, water evaporates, but they should still be able to reuse a lot of the water that they use in a closed loop. So, we want to make sure that they're required to look into those alternatives. Um, we'll also require the Illinois State Water Survey to use the data center's plan to model the anticipated impacts to shared water resources and also require permitting. So, all of this will further help communities and agencies figure out exactly when to stop data centers and when to curtail their water usage. It just gives us more information at the end of the day. Next slide. I think that's it. Yes, that is all I have. I saw a lot of questions in the chat. I think we're gonna wait for the end for questions. But I can also answer in the chat.